Part 1, Wheelchair Ramp Destroyed. It was still foggy when I got the call from my sister. Mai's voice was as cold as the early fall air in Pine Grove Estate, our quiet neighborhood. "You know, they destroyed my wheelchair ramp," Mai said, her voice trembling. "I'm stuck in my car. I can't get into my house." I looked at my watch. 5 a.m. Mai had just returned from a 2-week business trip, and now she couldn't even get into her own house. I quickly got dressed and rushed out of the house. Mai's house was only 3 blocks away, but at that moment it seemed like an eternity. When I got there, Mai was still in her car, her eyes red with exhaustion and anger. Her front porch, where a professionally designed wheelchair ramp had once been, was now a pile of scrap wood and screws. A piece of paper was pinned to the door, stamped with the red seal of the Homeowners Association, HOA. "Structure not approved," I read aloud. "Violation of HOA bylaws, Section 7.3. Must be demolished within 24 hours of this notice being mailed." "But I asked and received approval from the previous board," Mai protested, staring at the rubble before her. "I have all the paperwork, you know. We did everything right." "Who signed the notice?" I asked, already guessing the answer. "Victor Hong," Mai replied, her lips pressed together. "Our new HOA president. Victor Hong." The name had become infamous in our neighborhood in the 3 months since he took office. A small man with an exaggerated sense of self, always dressed in brightly colored polo shirts and silk scarves. He has made himself the protector of property values and is constantly imposing new rules on our community, from the color of our mailboxes to the types of trees we can plant. "Okay, first, we have to get you inside," I said, looking around for a way to move Mai up the 4 steps into the house. "I called the Disabled People's Association," Mai said. "They're sending someone. But I'm not going to let this go easily, Lynn. I know that look. It's the look Mai wore when she fought her way into law school after the accident that left her disabled. It's the look she wore when she ran for district attorney, then state judge, and finally, 2 years ago, Governor Catherine Mine-Gwynn. Yes, my sister is no ordinary citizen. And Victor Hong just made a terrible mistake." Part 2, Victor Hong and HOA Power. Victor Hong moved to Pine Grove Estate less than a year ago, but in that short time, he has already created a stir in our once peaceful community. He bought the largest house in the neighborhood, a Mediterranean-style mansion with a fountain in the front yard and a high stone wall surrounding it. After moving in, Victor quickly joined the Homeowners Association and within 3 months had manipulated his way to president. The previous president, Rosario, resigned after Victor accused her of being too lax in enforcing HOA rules. Once in power, Victor began to change things. He created an aesthetics committee to approve any exterior changes to the homes. He sent out violation notices for reasons as trivial as grass longer than 3 inches, or trash left exposed on the street for more than 12 hours. Fines piled up, and the mood in the neighborhood grew tense. But Victor's actions with Mai's wheelchair ramp crossed all boundaries. This was no longer about aesthetics or property value. This was blatant discrimination. While waiting for the disability assistance team to arrive, I called Victor's wife, Lisa Hong. Unlike her husband, Lisa was a pleasant and reasonable woman. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hi Lynn," she said, her voice still sleepy. "What's going on?" "Lisa, I'm at Mai's house," I said. "Her wheelchair ramp was vandalized overnight. There's an HOA notice on the door, signed Victor." There was a long silence. Then Lisa sighed. "Oh my gosh," she said softly. "He actually did it." "What do you mean?" "Victor has been talking about this all week. He says the ramp ruins the architectural integrity of the neighborhood and devalues the property." I told him not to touch it, but Lisa's voice trailed off. "He doesn't know who your sister is, does he?" "Obviously not," I said. "And Victor will be held accountable for this." When I hung up, the disability services team arrived. They quickly set up a temporary ramp to help Mai into her house. My sister was eerily calm as she finally made it into her house. Lynn, Mai said as she sat at the kitchen table, her hands on her briefcase. Call my office. Tell Jessica I need an urgent meeting with the legal team. And call the media team. We'll hold a press conference here, in front of my house, at 10 a.m. Are you sure? I asked, knowing full well this would cause a media firestorm. Mai smiled, the smile I had seen many times on TV when she faced tough political opponents. Victor wants to protect neighborhood values, she said. So watch the property value meter dance when Pine Grove Estate is on the national news for discriminating against the governor. By 9 a.m., the news had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. I stood by the window, watching the extraordinary scene unfold on our quiet street. Dozens of people were gathered on Mai's front lawn, neighbors with homemade signs, disability rights activists from local organizations, and a crew of reporters readying their equipment. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly neighbor who lived across the street from Mai, was handing out blue ribbons, the international symbol of disability rights. Mr. Peterson, who usually left the house only to tend to his small garden, was standing next to his wife's wheelchair, holding up a sign that read, "Accessibility is a human right." Would you like a cup of coffee? Mai asked, wheeling her wheelchair into the living room with 2 cups of coffee on a tray in her lap. She looked strangely calm, as if this were just a normal workday, not a media storm about to hit. Are you nervous? I asked, taking the cup of coffee. Mai shrugged, flashing a thin smile. You've been through so many battles, Lynn. This is just another one. But this time, it's not just about you, it's about all the people like you who struggle with discrimination every day. The noise outside grew louder. I glanced out the window and saw the vans of major television stations lined up along the street, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. Not just local stations, but national ones. Are Jessica and the media team you yet? Mai asked, taking a sip of coffee. On their way, I replied, checking my phone for messages. They'll be here in 15 minutes. The lawyers are on their way. Mai nodded, then put down her coffee and moved her wheelchair to her desk. She pulled out a thick file and began to skim through it. I recognized it as a copy of the HOA bylaws and the Americans with Disabilities Act, with meticulous notes in the margins. You're prepared for this, I remarked. Not really for this, Mai smiled. But you always have to be ready to prove your rights. That's something every disabled person has to learn. The clock struck 9:30 as a shiny black Mercedes pulled up in front of the house. Victor Hahn stepped out, wearing a well-tailored navy blue suit, a bright red tie, and dark sunglasses. He looked completely uncomfortable at the sight of the crowd, his expression shifting from confusion to concern, then to panic as he realized the television cameras were trained on him. What do you think he's going to do? I asked, watching Victor try to maneuver through the chattering crowd. He'll try to handle this privately, Mai replied, not looking up from her papers. People like Victor live off their public image. The last thing he wants is to be on national news as someone who discriminated against the disabled governor. I stood up at the knock on the door. Do you want me to meet him? Mai nodded. Let him wait. I need to finish some points in my speech. I stepped out onto the porch, facing Victor Hahn and the crowd watching. Reporters immediately raised their microphones and pointed their cameras at us. I could see sweat beading on Victor's forehead as he realized his predicament. Are you Victor Hahn? I asked, loud enough for everyone around to hear. Yes, he replied, his voice strained. What's going on? Why are there so many people here? You don't know who lives in this house? I asked, feeling a small satisfaction at his discomfort. Victor looked around, confused. A woman named Mai something. She's rarely home. Catherine Nguyen, I corrected. The governor of our state. The blood seemed to drain from Victor's face. He opened his mouth, then quickly closed it. The bright red tie around his neck seemed to stand out even more against his pale skin. No way, he whispered, but the reporter's microphone picked up the sound and broadcast it. And you destroyed her wheelchair ramp last night, I said, each word clear and firm, making it impossible for her to get back into the house after a long trip. Victor shook his head furiously, sweat now soaking his shirt collar. No, no. This must be a misunderstanding. I just sent the notice. I didn't order it to be demolished. So who did it? I asked, knowing that every word was being recorded by at least a dozen cameras. Victor faltered, fiddling with his tie. I hired a demolition crew, but they weren't supposed to come until after the notice period. It was supposed to be tomorrow. Just then, the door opened and Mai appeared. The crowd fell silent. She was wearing a smart gray business suit, her hair neatly tied back, a small smile on her face. Behind her stood Jessica, the communications director, tall and sharp in black, and two attorneys from the governor's office, each carrying briefcases. Hello, Hom, Mai said, her voice calm but sharp as steel. I think we need to talk about disability access and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Victor looked as if he were about to faint. He gripped the porch railing for balance. Governor Nguyen, he said, trying to regain his composure. This is a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't know this was your home. I'm sure we can work this out privately. Mai smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. So if this isn't the governor's house, is it okay to demolish the wheelchair ramp, Mr. Hall? The question hung in the air. The reporters took notes frantically. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it, like a goldfish trapped in a jar. Of course not, he finally managed. But there are HOA rules that we all have to follow. Rules that discriminate against people with disabilities? Mai asked again. Rules that violate federal law? Victor tried to say something, but one of Mai's lawyers stepped forward. Governor Nguyen received formal approval for this wheelchair ramp from the HOA 3 years ago. We have all the paperwork. Your removal is illegal under both state and federal law. The crowd began to murmur. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lisa Hong, Victor's wife, slip out of the Mercedes and try to blend in unnoticed with the crowd. She looked sad and embarrassed. At 10 o'clock, the press conference officially began. Mai, with Jessica's help, had set the perfect scene. A table with the state emblem was placed on the lawn, right in front of the pile of wood chips that still littered the driveway. As governor, Mai spoke not only about her case but also about the discrimination that people with disabilities face every day. She announced the new state-level initiative to protect access for people with disabilities, with the creation of a task force to review HOA regulations across the state. When I became governor, I promised to fight for every citizen, Mai said, her voice echoing through the PA system. Today, I see that fight starting right at my door. But this is not just about me. This is about every person with a disability who has struggled with barriers that are not just physical but also attitudinal. I will not let anyone in this state go through the same thing. Mai went on to announce that her office would investigate not only this incident but also Victor Huan's past activities in other communities. She also called for an investigation into his real estate company, Hong Luxury Properties, for compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Reporters asked questions, flashbulbs flashing. Mai answered each question with the calm and precision of a lawyer and the decisiveness of a leader. Governor, do you believe this was an intentional act of discrimination against people with disabilities? A reporter asked. I believe this is an example of systemic discrimination, Mai replied. A system that allows individuals and organizations to put property values and aesthetics above basic human rights and dignity. The story quickly went viral. Within an hour, it was on social media and major news sites with headlines like Governor Nguyen blocked from his own home over HOA discrimination and paradox of power, when HOA president takes on governor. Victor Hong, standing at the back of the crowd, looked as if his world was collapsing around him. Lisa had made her way to her husband and was whispering something in his ear, but Victor just shook his head, eyes wide with horror. As the press conference ended, Mai looked directly into the camera and made one final statement: I want my message to be heard loud and clear. No one should be denied basic access because of who they are or what they look like. And no one, whether they're an HOA president or a corporate CEO, is above the law. Today, we begin a new journey for our state, a journey toward true equality and justice for all. The crowd erupted in applause. Even the reporters couldn't help but applaud. And I, standing next to my sister, felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This is why I became governor, not just because she's a great leader, but because she has the ability to turn personal challenges into opportunities for social change. Part 4, The Neighborhood in Turmoil, Extended. 2 glasses of iced lemon tea, I said as I set my drinks down on the kitchen table. Ma was watching the news on her iPad, the headlines constantly updating about the story that had become a national phenomenon in a matter of hours. Thanks, Ma said, sipping her tea. My office is flooded with calls. Other governors, senators, even the White House have called to express their support. Do you think Victor will resign? I asked, looking out the window where reporters were still filming and taking pictures outside. He has no choice, Ma replied. But that's just the first step. This is about much more than one man or one wheelchair ramp. This is about a whole system that allows discrimination to happen under the guise of regulation and property values. My phone rang, a text from Ms. Rodriguez. HOA emergency meeting tonight, 7 o'clock, at the community center. Please notify the governor. It seems the HOA board doesn't want to wait, I said, passing the message to Mai. We're going, Mai decided. This isn't just about you anymore, it's about the neighborhood and the principles we stand for. For the rest of the day, Pine Grove Estate was in a strange mood, part excitement at the attention, part shame at the reason behind it, and a big part anger directed at Victor Hong. Social media exploded with the hashtags #JusticeForMai and #HOAGoneWrong. Residents shared their own experiences with Victor's arbitrary rule. The Bennetts told of being fined for leaving their 7-year-old son's bike outside for more than an hour. The same-sex couple Lewiston told of having to remove their rainbow flag. And Mrs. Thompson, an 80-year-old widow, revealed that Victor had threatened to sue her over her aesthetically inappropriate garden statues. I didn't expect there to be so many stories, Mai said as we scrolled through the social media posts. This has been brewing for a long time. And now it's exploded, I added. By 6:45 p.m., we were ready for the HOA meeting. Mai was dressed in a casual dark blue suit, looking professional but not too formal. She wanted to be seen as a neighbor tonight, not the governor. We arrived at the community center and found the parking lot packed. People from all over the neighborhood were there, people who would never normally show up at HOA meetings. There were even a few television cameras filming the scene outside. When we walked in, the room was surprisingly quiet. All eyes were on Mai. Then, as if on an invisible signal, everyone stood up and began to applaud. It wasn't the polite, half-hearted kind of applause that politicians give. It was real honor, a recognition of Mai's fight. Mai nodded her thanks, her expression humble as she pushed her wheelchair to an empty seat in the front row. I sat down next to her, feeling a change in the atmosphere, a new solidarity among neighbors who usually only nodded politely to each other. Victor Hong sat alone at the presiding table, sweat beading on his forehead. He was wearing a tan suit tonight, his usual haughtiness gone. Lisa was not beside him. I call the meeting to begin, Victor said, his voice shaking as he rapped his gavel on the table. As everyone knows, we have a situation in our community. A situation? Mrs. Rodriguez's voice came from behind. You called illegal discrimination a situation? A murmur spread through the room. Victor swallowed. I apologize for my language, he said. And I apologize for this unfortunate incident. I did not know that the house belonged to the governor. What if it wasn't the governor's house? Ms. Rodriguez spoke again, standing so that everyone could see her. At 72, she was still a formidable presence with her silver hair tied back in a bun and her eyes piercing. If it was just a normal disabled person's house, would it be acceptable to destroy their wheelchair ramp? The murmuring spread through the room again, louder this time, angrier. No, of course not, Victor said quickly. I just want to say that this is a misunderstanding. I never intended to. I want to know who authorized you to make this decision, Mr. Patel, a longtime member of the board, said. He stood, holding a thick notebook. I've reviewed the minutes of every board meeting in the last 6 months. By law, any action taken requires a vote of the entire board. But there was no vote on removing the wheelchair ramp at 47 Maple Drive. All eyes turned to Victor, who was wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. And I have proof that the wheelchair ramp was properly approved 3 years ago, said Rosario, the HOA president before Victor, holding up a stack of papers. She walked to the front of the room and placed the papers on the chairman's desk. Here's the approved application, signed by the entire board at that time, including me. Its demolition was completely illegal. Victor looked down at the papers, then back at the crowd, slowly realizing that he had lost all support. It wasn't just about the wheelchair ramp anymore, it was about how he ran the HOA, about how he treated his neighbors. I propose a recall vote, Mr. Patel said, his voice echoing in the silent room. Now. Victor looked around the room, searching for support, but saw nothing but cold, disappointed eyes. Under our bylaws, we require a simple majority vote from the members present to remove a chair, Mr. Patel continued. I propose to proceed now. Victor looked down at the documents before him, as if searching for. Part 5, The Scandal Spreads. In the following days, reporters dug into Victor Juan's history. They discovered that his discrimination against people with disabilities was not limited to Pine Grove Estate. Before moving here, Victor had served as HOA president in 2 other neighborhoods, and in both places, he was forced to resign after similar allegations. In addition, Victor's real estate company, Home Luxury Properties, had a history of violating the Americans with Disabilities Act at its commercial projects. At least 3 lawsuits were settled out of court for large sums. These findings attracted the attention of the Department of Justice. A federal investigation was opened into the activities of Victor and his company. At Pine Grove Estate, residents began sharing stories of how Victor had abused his power. The Singhs were fined for placing religious symbols in their garden. The Petersons were forced to repaint their house because the color was too light. And it seems Victor had a plan to buy some of the troubled properties at a low price, rebuild them, and sell them at a higher price. Each day, a new detail emerged, and the residents of Pine Grove Estate discovered that they had unwittingly become part of a much larger conspiracy, one that was revealed by a wheelchair ramp. Part 6, Change and Reconciliation. A month after the incident, Pine Grove Estate had completely changed. The HOA had a new charter with strict rules on accessibility and anti-discrimination. As the new president, Rosario worked closely with Mai's office to ensure that any changes were legally and ethically sound. Victor Hom had sold his house and moved away, facing multiple lawsuits and an ongoing federal investigation. His company was also struggling, with many customers and partners withdrawing after the scandal became public. And Mai? Not only did she have a new, well-built and aesthetically pleasing wheelchair ramp, she had become a national symbol for disability rights. Her approval ratings had skyrocketed, and many people were talking about running for higher office in the future. One fall evening, as the leaves began to turn gold and red, I visited Mai at her home. We sat on the porch, overlooking the quiet street, a street that has now become nationally famous. You know, Mai said, sipping her tea. There's something ironic about this whole situation. What is it? I asked. Victor Hom is worried about property values, she smiled. But by trying to get rid of what he considered undesirables, he inadvertently created a better, more cohesive, and much more valuable community. I nodded, looking down the street where our neighbors were chatting outside, children were playing on the lawn, and an elderly couple was strolling hand in hand. Pine Grove Estate had changed, not just physically with its new wheelchair ramps and accessible entrance, but also mentally. I think you turned a bad situation into an opportunity to make real change, I said. Mai smiled. That's what I learned from my accident. Sometimes the biggest obstacles can be the most powerful stepping stones. As night fell on Pine Grove Estate, I couldn't help but think about how one selfish and discriminatory act had inadvertently sparked a larger movement for change. A reminder that sometimes, from the biggest challenges, we can find the greatest opportunities. And sometimes, as in the case of Victor Hall, when you dig someone else's hole, you end up falling into it yourself.